everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a LatinX writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive. Today we have a brand new guest here via virtual Zoom room, and I'm so excited to have them on. I like to start every episode by having my guests introduce themselves. So your name and how you identify for the people at home.
Hi, my name is Estevan. I am a queer Latinx TV writer, actor, and director currently living in Los Angeles.
I always like to know where my guests are from. So what's the short story? What's the long story when people ask you where you're from?
Where am I from? I am from South Central Phoenix. That's where I was born and raised. I grew up there. My parents moved to Phoenix when they were really young from Mexico. And so I'm first generation. I'm the oldest of my family. Spent my whole life there, really. It wasn't until I moved to LA that I left the state.
I like to get a background on people's family. So your parents, what do they do for a living? What's their story? All that stuff.
You paint the picture.
Yeah.
My mom, I came from a really big family. My mom is one of 8 and my dad is one of 6. And all of my tios and tias had at least 3 kids, sometimes 6 kids each. So there was just a lot of little Mexicans running around. My dad is a mechanic. His dad is a mechanic. They own a automotive repair shop, walking distance from where I grew up. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom. They met in high school. They had I felt sort of I don't know, film meet cute kind of thing. They met in high school and got married shortly after, and then had me.
Do you know what brought your family to the United States and why Phoenix in particular?
I don't know that. Because it was really, it wasn't close because my mom is from Culiacan and my dad's from Jalisco. So it was quite a journey. Maybe they had family that was there. Actually, I think my dad's dad had family that was there already. And so it was sort of the, hey, come this way kind of thing. But they were really young. My mom, I think, was 8. And my dad was maybe 3 or 4. So they were very little and packed up and came this way.
So I don't know anything about Phoenix. I know it's in Arizona, and I usually describe Arizona as not friendly to strangers or outsiders. That's how my sense of it is. So how would you describe Phoenix and how you grew up and for someone that's never been there?
It's only 6 hours from LA, but it is very much a different world entirely. Especially South Central Phoenix, sort of the entire state is kind of this weird tug of war between very Mexican American families that sort of Chicano, that vibe is very much at the center of the state. And then everywhere else you have the Scottsdale, so the Beverly Hills of the desert, which is just very affluent white people who I'm projecting but probably resent those that live in South Central Phoenix. And so I think it's a state that's trying to figure out who it is. But actual Phoenix it's very brown. A lot of the signs are in Spanish. There's good, if you want good Mexican food, I will say. LA doesn't always deliver, but if you want good Mexican food, go there. My mom will make you something.
So yeah, what was your childhood like? Can you describe your home, your siblings, what did you all get up to?
What was my childhood like? I was really am really shy. I had a whole bunch of really loud cousins, and I was happy to just be the quiet one in the corner. I was painfully shy. I was not very outgoing. I struggled to have conversations, didn't have a lot of friends. And so I kept to myself a lot. My parents grew up really, really poor. And I think, my dad worked really hard to kind of try and change that. But a lot of my family kind of still struggled with that. They, there were moments, or there were Christmases I felt like maybe everyone was doing a little better than other years, and you can kind of see that in Christmas photos and stuff. But for the most part, everyone was really kind of struggling to make it and to survive. It was also really interesting because I felt like even in my family, I've always sort of felt like a little bit of a misfit everywhere, and I felt like even in my sort of my dad's family versus my mom's family, I think my mom's family tried to assimilate a little more quickly, which I think is like rooted in whiteness, and so they were still very proud of Mexicans, and everyone spoke Spanish, and it was very that, but it felt like there wasn't this attempt to like button things up, and to move out to the bigger houses and to do that when they could. And I felt like all of my dad's siblings largely stayed nearby. All my tios had the Dickies pants and the white tees, and very sort of a total vibe. And I felt like even in that, I was caught in this middle of like, okay, well, when I'm with this side of the family, this is how I behave, and then when I'm with this side of the family, this is how I behave. So like, what of that is true? And so I felt like that was one of the tug of wars that I was caught in growing up.
I'm from Chicago, so I know like sort of the Latinx community there, and it's different than it is in LA. So like, how does it compare to Phoenix? Like, how would you describe it to someone?
It's very Mexican, and I'm sure this is awful to say, but it wasn't until I like grew up that I realized there were other kinds of Latinx people. I just thought everybody was Mexican because that was everybody that I knew. That was everybody in Phoenix. Like that's just it's so close to Mexico. And so that's just what I thought everyone was. And it wasn't until I grew up that I was like, oh, you have Puerto Ricans, you have Dominican. Oh, there are other kinds of us. But it's very Mexican in Phoenix. A lot of families, I feel like, stay there. Like it's very a city that your family goes, they plant roots, and then you are meant to stay and sort of cultivate that, kind of sacrifice whatever you may want for yourself, and help raise cousins and help with your grandparents, and it becomes sort of a very home base, for everyone, even the younger generations.
So I'm always curious about people during their high school years. 14 to 18, I frame it in these questions. Who were you? Who were you pretending to be? And how did other people see you?
A mess. The rough years, the 14 to 18. Who was I? I was the overachiever. I was so driven to get out of Phoenix and to be somebody that I was like, I'm gonna get out of here. So I was in every honors class. I joined every club. I like whatever I could be a part of to like bolster this resume to get out. That's what I would do. I would do the extra credit. I was the teacher's pet, very much that. And I really only had like one good friend. She, got bamboozled into being my friend on the first day of freshman year, and she was my homegirl. She was it. And so I didn't really have a lot of friends. I was not cool a day in my life. I was trying. Who was I pretending to be? Pretending to be straight. Honestly, I had a girlfriend the first year, and then I had a different girlfriend. It's like the last year and a half, and was just desperate to convince myself that that was true, and that it was something I could fix or wish away. All the while, like kind of trying to pull away at being a shy person. I had such a desire to be more daring, to be more outgoing, to care less about what other people thought. There were things, I never tried out for a sport, but like wanted to at least try out. And the closest to a sport that I got was theater. I decided, okay, I'm going to give this a go, and I'm going to audition for the spring musical. And it was actually an English teacher who was like, you would be great, come on out. And got so nervous walked into my audition, got so nervous that I walked in and lied and said that I was just coming in to let her know that I forgot I had an orthodontist appointment and couldn't audition, and left. And I don't think she believed me, but she was very kind, because I regretted it the moment I walked out of those double doors. I was like, oh, this was my chance to like do something, to be brave. And so the next day, she was like, hey, if you want to ever come in, I know it was the last day of auditions, but if you want to come in during lunch today, I'll let you audition. Okay, I'll see you at lunch. And so I came in, and God only knows what I did, but she cast me as an understudy in Once Upon a Mattress. And to my fear, the senior who was playing him was ineligible because of his grades. And so like 2 days before we opened, I had to like step into the role, and it was instantly liberating because no one knew who I was. And I went out, he was a mute king. And so there are no lines, everything's pantomime. And so for me, as a very shy, obese, light-skinned Latino with freckles, who was closeted, to come out and like be bigger than I had ever been, was so freeing. And everyone afterwards was like, "You did great, cool." Like all the hot straight guys were like, "Really funny, man." And I'm like, "Oh, I love this."
And so, like, what'd you do after high school? Like, did you have a plan? Did things go according to plan?
I have always had a plan, and I was like, I'm applying to USC, I'm applying to NYU, I applied to all these schools, and I thought I will just go wherever I feel moved to attend, because I've done every club, I've done every class, I've gotten all the letters of recommendation. And I remember the day that all of these letters came, and I was like, yes, I'm gonna just sit on the floor and like have a moment. And I opened them one after one after the other, and they were all rejection letters. I was rejected from every single school that I applied to. I realize now, because I don't test well, so like my SAT scores were awful, but it was the most I just sobbed. I sobbed on a brown carpeted floor, in Phoenix, thinking, "This is it. I will never get out." So I went to the only school that accepted me, which was the University of Arizona. And it's always so clear afterwards of like, oh, I needed that time to. It was 2 hours away from Phoenix, which doesn't sound very far, but for like my mom, it was another world of like, oh my God, how are you leaving? And I went and I studied film and television, with an emphasis in screenwriting and directing the actor. And it was the best little program in the desert, because you have class with the same, in my program, you have class with the same 13 people all 4 years, and you crew each other's films and you critique each other's scripts and you act in each other's things. And it was really just this like band of artists trying to say something, make something. And it really was the beginning, I think, of me. It was where I came out. So all of my stuff was very queer. It was really like the beginning of me finding my voice and taking chances and kind of stepping into who I was as a writer and as a director.
You applied to like NYU, USC. You majored in like film and screenwriting. So it's obvious you knew what you wanted to do. So like, where did that start? Where did that, even the idea that this was something you could study and like do professionally, come in?
I mean, I think writing is honestly, it's the only thing I've ever been like naturally good at. I think it came from just because I didn't have a lot of friends, and I'm much older than my siblings. We're 11 and 15 years apart. And so for a long time, I grew up as an only child when my cousins weren't around. And so my parents, because I was really quiet, I could just sit, like they could take me to dinners with my dad's bosses, and I would just sit there at the table, and I was listening to everything. I wouldn't comment or anything, but I was just paying attention to how people talked and what they said and what they didn't say. And so because I didn't have a lot of friends, I spent time by myself just making up stories and writing them. And I would sit in this tree in our backyard, or I would climb up onto our roof, in the barrio, and just like write and make friends. But it definitely was not seen as a career. Like my parents, they came from such humble beginnings that they were very insistent on me trying to go into a more traditional career, be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an architect. And so it definitely came with some pushback for a while. Once I got to the point where I was going to go and study it in film school, they were like, okay, good luck, we support. But it took a long time to kind of get to that point.
Yeah. And so why film specifically? Like, why screenwriting?
It actually wasn't. It was filmed for a long time because it's what I thought. I felt like there was this shame kind of if you wanted to do TV. I mostly watched TV growing up, like the Disney Channel. Those were my friends. I'd come home from school and I'd like wait for the next Disney Channel original movie. I was like, oh, they see me. I feel seen. About a story about a mermaid. I don't know, but that's that's what I consumed, but it didn't feel highbrow enough. And so when I went to film school, I thought, no one's really like doing TV like that or saying that they're doing TV like that. It wasn't until I was a sophomore in high school that I saw reruns of season 1 of Grey's Anatomy in an effort to promo the season 2 that was coming. And watching that was my first moment of like, oh, this, like, I want to write these kinds of TV stories. And so that, even though that was the name of the program, was screenwriting, it was always geared towards TV. Because everyone talked about, you know, classic films they had seen, and I just didn't grow up watching that. Like, I would watch Designing Women with my mom, and you know, Golden Girls and Will and Grace, and I would watch those shows, but I didn't feel like it was cool to say like, I want to do TV. You had to want to make the next great cinematic masterpiece.
Yeah, I think especially out of the 90s, so many like big directors and filmmakers came out, and yeah. But I remember when that season of Grey's Anatomy came out, people were acting like the wheel had been reinvented until like
it felt like that to me. Like that, I remember the moment that I saw Katherine Heigl's character lying on the floor of the bathroom for like an entire episode. It might have been multiple episodes, but I just thought, this, like, the drama of laying on the floor, and to have people come to her and have conversations there. It felt so emotional, and that's such a place that I write from, that I felt, okay, I can do this. It doesn't have to be things blowing up or anything else.
What did you do after college? Like, did you have a plan? Did things go according to plan?
I moved to LA 11 days after graduation. I had cultivated a relationship with an alum who was working in the industry, and had said, hey, you know, if you come out, I will help you get into a writer's room as a PA, but you have to be here ready to go with a car, in an apartment, ready, like fully responsible and functional. And I was like, girl, say less. I am there. I can do it. And I threw my cap and gown. I drove my little beat up white Hyundai Elantra across the desert, came, got an apartment, and like emailed. I was like, I'm here. Like, where do I go? What do I do? When do I start? And like days went by and nothing. And so I you know, phone calls and emails and nothing. And finally she got back and she was like, hey, so sorry, they gave the spot to someone's niece. I'll keep you in mind. And I thought, oh no, I have bills to pay. What am I gonna do? And so that was the beginning of a very long journey to get into a room. It has taken me 9 years, which is wild to say. I took anything and everything I could to get to that point. I took an internship at a lit management company, reading scripts and writing coverage, which, you know, was free. Technically, I was paying to work because I wasn't being paid, and I wasn't in college. This was at the time when you could do unpaid internships before the lawsuit. And I was paying for gas and for lunch every day. So I was really paying to have this alleged internship. I took an assistant job to Tyra Banks and the judges on a cycle of America's Next Top Model. I wrote tweets for a refrigerator, or speech for a refrigerator saleswoman. I wrote tweets for branded content for companies, like whatever. If you had a check, I was going to do it, all in an effort trying to get over to TV writing, which is kind of how I landed at Dick Clark Productions. I was there for 5 years. It was supposed to be a 2-week gig. They needed someone to make a pitch deck, and I had never heard of that. And they said, do you know how to make pitch decks? And I said, absolutely. And went home and Googled what is a pitch deck, and which I feel like is a very sort of like immigrant or POC mindset of like, I can figure it out. I can learn it. What do you need me to do? And made that for 2 weeks, but it was at the same time that they were getting ready for the American Music Awards, and they do a pre-show, like a red carpet special. And they asked me if they knew I wanted to write. They asked me if I would be interested in helping to write that. And so I did. And that was like the first kind of step into that. And I was there for 5 years in development while still writing some of their smaller award shows and some of the red carpet specials for their bigger ones, like the Golden Globes and the Billboard Music Awards, and a whole award season slew.
What does like writing for an award show, a red carpet? Like, what does that look like? Like,
It's very different. It's very different from a room. But here's what I will say. Even though it may not have been what I dreamed of writing, it taught me three things I think that are really crucial to maybe how I've gotten into a room now. One is how to take a note, because I was very precious about every sort of like scripted thing I was working on personally. But when you're working on a red carpet special or anything for live TV, you have notes from the producers, you have notes from like the network or whatever streaming platform it's on. And then you have notes from the talent, who are the hosts who are going to actually say this thing. And that's sort of the like second point, is how to write on the page how someone actually talks. Because when you're writing for live, like they're not characters that you've made up. They are real like people, like Ryan Seacrest, and speaks very differently than like a Jordan Sparks. Or there's little things that they're going to want to say or not want to say, or how they'll want to say them. And you have to try and make it feel as real on the page as possible. And how to write quickly, because you are rewriting constantly. Sometimes at award shows, presenters get sick, and so now whatever joke you had doesn't work with who they're presenting now. Or if you're on the red carpet, someone's not coming and you have to rework a toss, or you're writing during a commercial break and you've got to get it into the prompter in like 10 seconds before it's ready to go. It was a very fast paced writing boot camp, I feel like.
yeah, and I'm always curious about the first 2 years for people. Like, I always say, like, it's the hardest, but if you sort of can get through the first 2 years, because you can move back anytime before then. So, like, to someone who's thinking about moving here, someone who's in the middle of 2 years, what would you say to that person? What would you say to you when, fresh off like Phoenix,
Stay strong. It's really hard. It's really, really hard. The move out here, I feel like my first 8 years were really hard, but it's really difficult. I think no one really understands the marathon that is TV writing. I feel like theater in New York tends to move much, much faster, but it feels like in LA, we're out of like a sprint pace, and LA, like it's endurance, and you have to stick it out, and you're comparing yourself to where other people are, and wondering why you aren't at those same career markers. You're surrounded by what feels like everyone else who wants to do the exact same thing you're trying to do. And so you feel disheartened, and you feel alone, or at least that's how I felt. I felt like I'm crazy. I'm crazy to think that me from Phoenix can move here and make it. And it took a lot of tears to just kind of stick it out. But I feel like if you can stick it out the first 2 years, learn the freeways, find a decent apartment that doesn't have crazy roommates, and just survive. Like, you don't have to make it big in your first 2 years. You probably won't. Maybe you will. Maybe your dad owns CAA or something, but it wasn't that way for me, and it's not that way for a lot of people. So you're doing okay, is what I would say. Just keep going.
And so what was the next move after, you have some like writing experience with like award shows and like red carpets? Did that lead to anything?
It did and it didn't. I kept waiting. It's that thing where so you're not struggling anymore. You can pay your rent on time. You have enough money. You don't feel like you're quite as brand new as you were. Maybe you have a couple more gray hairs, but that's all right. And then you're to the point where you're like, I know, but now I'm too old to like start over. Like, I can't live off of $15 an hour. So like, how can I transition this to be what I want it to be? And I kept waiting for writing for live to somehow evolve into writing TV dramas. And I got to a point where I realized it wasn't going to, which was a very scary realization. And I knew in my bone marrow that I was traveling along a freeway that if I didn't get off, I would never get over to where it is that I wanted to be. Not to say that it can't for other people, but I just felt like it wasn't going to happen. And so I left my position. I left my office. I resigned. And Dick Clark were incredibly supportive, and we'll have you back as a freelance if you need a check, girl. We got you. But I left, and I was like, okay, I'm going to really focus every spare second I have on rewriting this pilot that I have, and getting over, because I'm not new anymore. Surely I should know someone who can help me start over. And I had a friend who was working on a network drama, as a showrunner's assistant. And he said, hey, we need a PA. Will you come PA on the next season? I said, of course. He's like, it's not a lot of money. It's mostly getting coffee and lunch. Can you do? I said, 100%. And the showrunner refused to meet with me because I was too experienced and was afraid that if I took the job, I'd realize how unglamorous it was and quit. And she didn't want to have to bother finding someone in the middle of the season. And I was like, no, just meet with me. I promise. I promise. I know I can do it. And it was a year, over a year of not even getting interviews. Like I couldn't get anyone to give me an interview to get coffee. And I'm like, I promise, I'm willing, I'm able. And it was terrifying. I ran through all of my savings. I was very stressed and depressed and felt like maybe I had made the biggest mistake. And that's the point that, but I'm not the best at asking for help. So all those people that I knew, I didn't ask them for help, which is use your network. Like, it's okay. Don't be that person that asks for a favor every 5 minutes. But if you have close people, like, ask them. And it took a close friend saying, have you reached out to so-and-so or this person or that person? And I was like, well, I don't want to be that LA person. They're like, you don't have any money. You don't have a job. Ask for help. And I was like, okay. And so I want to be honest that, like, a lot of people are like, how did you get it? How did you get your first TV drama gig? And it was only because I had a friend who knew a friend who was working at the production company and passed my resume along for season 2 of LA's Finest, which was on Spectrum, and for a writer's PA. And I went and I interviewed twice, once with the showrunner's assistant and once with the creators and the EPs, and got the job. And it was probably the best first room I could have asked for, because the Brandons who created the show and everyone on the entire writing staff were so supportive. And I didn't realize, it was my first time, so I didn't realize that this wasn't the norm, but to be able to sit in a room and hear how stories broken, of course, you're still getting the lunch, you're cleaning the fridge, you're doing all that, but to get to hear how stories being broken, to hear how writers pitch ideas, to read outlines, to read scripts, to see notes from the network and from the studio, to pitch story as a PA. I took a little while, but they were like, listen, if you want to move up, don't be shy. We're not going to ask you more than once. Like, if you have something that you think is smart enough to say it. And it was the best learning experience that I could have possibly asked for. And so I feel very lucky.
Yeah. And, I am curious about that, like speaking up in the room as a PA, like it might feel like very like overwhelming, or feel like these people have been doing it much longer. Like, I'm sure my idea is they've already tossed before even spouting it out. So like, what was that moment where you were like, I think I have a good idea. I'm going to say it out loud and it's not going to backfire on me?
Yeah, it's terrifying. To be honest, it's terrifying because you don't want to seem green. You don't want to seem disrespectful. But I got to the point where there were enough times that an idea that I had in my head but didn't say would then be pitched 10 minutes later, and they're like, "Great, let's land there, and we'll work from that story point." And I was like, "Okay, well, obviously I'm not an idiot, so maybe I should just say something." I'm still a very shy person, so I took a beat to hear how it is that people pitch story. You have to pitch it respectfully. And so I kind of learned the lingo a little. And I just thought, well, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I pitch one time and they say, hey, please don't do that anymore. I'm like, okay, fine. And so my first pitch, after days, maybe a week and a half of them breaking the first episode, my first pitch was, can't we just start at episode 2 and lose all? I mean, like, it's not a great idea as a PA to pitch that you cut a week's worth. I just thought, isn't it more interesting to start here? And I think all the creators and the EPs were like, oh, that's a big pitch. It's not like a story pitch. That's kind of crazy. But I think they respected the fact that because I justified it as to why. I gave reasons and stuff. And I think they appreciated my storytelling point of view. And encouraged me to continue doing that. I would say if you're in a room and you're in that writer's position, writer's assistant position, or writer's PA position, and you're not really sure. It is a case-by-case situation. Talk to the showrunner's assistant or the writer's assistant and say, hey, has this happened before? If you have a staff writer or anyone on the writing staff you feel close to, ask them if they think it's a good idea, or pitch them something you were going to say that day, and kind of take a minute. You can't take back your first pitch, so make it count. You don't have to pitch all the time, but once, twice, 5 times throughout the season where you feel like, okay, this is a moment that I could let everyone know that I have something to contribute, does go a long way.
Did that experience in that room lead to anything? Were you able to build from it?
Yeah, I met Pam Bisset, who was an EP on that show, and she, it's a TV veteran, has been around for quite a while, and she had a show that was going shortly after our show was wrapping, and asked if I would move up to writer's assistant to do sort of a mini room. It was just a script order, and so I was like, of course, absolutely. And came to do that. We were on the Paramount lot for like 4 days before the pandemic kicked in, and then transitioned to being in a Zoom room until June, when it was officially picked up. And I have to say, being a writer's assistant is the hardest job, not for anyone's fault in the room or for anything else, but it is an incredibly big task to ask one person to transcribe everything and recall everything quickly. And I feel now it was such a boot camp on learning how to craft story, but on a different level. And our show's, complex in that it has multiple timelines. And so it was a tough one for me to transition into. And I've done it all. I mean, I've had a lot of challenging jobs, but this one really toughened me up and made me a better writer, honestly. And thankfully, amazingly, when we got picked up for our official order, I got to co-write one of the episodes on the back half with Pam. And I just finished my episode, which is crazy that after 9 years of trying and trying, I have my first TV drama writing credit.
Congrats.
Thank you.
And yeah, and sort of how you got on my radar, because I keep track of everybody. I'm sort of trying to figure out who's doing what and what they're up to and how seriously they're taking it. But I saw that you had some success with a script writing contest. So
oh yes, yeah. In my time at LA's Finances, I was sitting in the room and hearing all of these lessons of okay, let's do it this way, let's do it that way. I would go home and rewrite this pilot that I had been working on for a long time, and it just truthfully was not very good. It was not working, and I would take the lessons and say, okay, let's try and tell as many stories as you can in a scene, and how do you come in late and get out early, and what does that really look like, and what is the most interesting way to weave this. And I was trying and trying and trying, and it was such a passion project of mine. And at the end of the season, they were kind enough, the Brandons, the creators of the show, and Pam and another EP, to read my pilot, and they passed it on to their manager, and that's how I got my rep, which was a first big win. And then shortly after that is when I submitted to Script Pipeline at the same time as applying to the fellowships and the other competitions, and was genuinely confused and humbled when Matt, who runs Script Pipeline, called to let me know that I was going to be announced as a semifinalist the next day, but also was going to be announced as a finalist in the top 10 the week following. And I cried such tears of joy, and he had the nicest things to say. And it's a very queer Latinx show. It is very personal. It's very specific. And for him to have the things that he said to say to me, I couldn't believe it. And then in July, they announced the winner live on Twitter. It's normally this event, but because of the pandemic, it was on Twitter. And we were all on Zoom because there's a TV writing side and then there's a screenwriting side. And so all 20 of us were together. And I had read the other 10 scripts in the TV, and they were incredible. And I met them all. We all did like a little Zoom, and they were so kind. And they announced the winner, and that I had won. And I couldn't believe it, because it was a year after nearly giving up. It's a year of when I had started on LA's Finest, which kind of started this whole wild year of my life. But the year before that was really rough. I was doubting every decision I had made to leave Dick Clark. I had no money. I had no prospects. I was certain that I was just going to have to pack it back up and move back to Phoenix, because I didn't see a way out, a way in. And for a year later to win this competition, to have a manager, to be working, it was the most beautiful high point in the story so far.
Yeah, and so I am curious about your storytelling. Like what are the stories you like to write? What are the themes? What are the characters that you're attracted to?
I'm a very emotional writer. Like I come from writing a character first, and from the gut, from the heart. And so I like to explore like themes of misfits, or themes of change. Like I think that's the thing that I really love about TV. Like love is this idea that you can, on a blank page, create these people and then watch them hopefully change over years. Like, 6, 7, 8, 10 seasons, you can have someone go from this place and go through this journey that they're so weathered and evolved from where they began. Like that's the thing that I love the most. So I always say that I write nuanced, emotional, human experience dramas, but like heavily influenced with style. Like some may feel like maybe overwritten in style, but I grew up on like music videos. Music videos are such a interesting storytelling device. Like there's so much being said lyrically, musically, and then in the visual style. Like there's sometimes 3 stories happening at once, and I think that's I try to like put the feel on the page.
I also know that you have a podcast. So it's called Your Gay Cousins. So how did it start, and like why?
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out the why. No, I do co-host a podcast called Your Gay Cousins with Michael and Estevan, and we are not actually related. We're not actually cousins, but Michael works in non-scripted TV in development and has been in the entertainment industry for a while, and we just felt like we wanted to create something that lived in that beautiful, fun place of the intersection of queer pride and Latinx culture, and wanted to make something that was a half hour, that was silly, and we say it's a half hour of chisme, pop culture commentary, and stories that would make our moms cry in Spanglish. So most of what we say, I would cringe if a family heard it, but it's such a good time. And we were so surprised after we put out our first episode, because podcasts, as you know, it takes some time to build and find their sort of, as we say, familia, but we were shocked to see how many other queer Latin cousins, as we call them, are out there that related to some aspect of it. So we always say like being a gay cousin is not actually about like sexual orientation. It's just like it's a mindset. Like you're the fun cousin. You're the one that people want to sit next to at the holiday or at the table, because you've got like all the good gossip and you're down to have a good time. And we were so blown away by how many people were like, oh yeah, my mom also puts pots and pans in the oven, or, just little things where you're like, I did that as a kid. And yeah, we're going on 2 years, which is wild, but we're having the best, most dumb time.
I started listening to it. I think it's definitely helped me get through quarantine. I was saying this like a month or 2 ago. I was like, I miss my friends. I miss hanging out with them. I miss talking with them, and like, just like how we used to. And that's why I like your podcast. It reminds me of like me and my friends just like talking shit, like being idiots, and just like catching up, and like, I don't know, just talk about pop culture too. I think it's like definitely missed.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that you enjoy it. I know that I usually don't tell like people that I'm trying to be like a serious writer about it, because it's the place that I'm hands down like the most unfiltered and just like the dumbest version of myself. But when people appreciate, it's like when people appreciate you at your dumb, like they get to have you at your professional. That's how I feel about it.
You know, I talk to a lot of Latinx writers, and they always have, it's a journey to like sort of claim that identity, you know? You and Michael have like carved a little niche for yourselves in like the queer space on podcasts. So I'm just curious of like your journey of like how you just like identified and how you saw yourself as like this Latinx person. And, you know, was it a journey? Was it a struggle? Like, can you talk about it?
Yeah, it definitely, I think it's a journey that's still in progress. I think I ran from it for a really long time. Because I didn't feel like it was for me. You know, Spanish was my first language growing up, but then I went to an all white private school and I wanted to blend in. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be accepted. And I tried to get rid of as many parts of myself that didn't fit the mold. And that included language, that included a lot of culture. And I'm also light skinned, and so even though my family is darker skinned, I didn't feel like it was the label was for me, and it took me a really long time to understand that there's nuance to it. Like it can be, I am it already. I don't have to be more or less. And I always think of that part of that scene in Selena where she's talking, Edward James Olmos is talking about the fact that they got to know about being Mexican American is exhausting. You got to know about Oprah, and you got to know about Christina. You got to speak Spanish. You got to be more American than American, more Mexican than Mexicans. And it's exhausting. And I related to that on such a personal level, because I had spent so much of my life trying to prove or a change. And it's really only in the last like 3 years that I was like, okay, everything is valid as it is, and there can be nuance to the identity and to the label and behind it, because one, Latinx encompasses so many different cultures as it is, and so however it is that me and my friends relate to it is enough.
Yeah, no, I think for a lot of people, it's like they think this Latinx identity is like a destination point that you're like, and now I've reached it. I am max Latinx, and no one can tell me shit, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, I talk to so many people, and it's like, no, you were doing it. This, how you are, how you present it, like that is it. And it can evolve, it can change. But I don't know, I think we're a little too critical about it, especially for ourselves, you know?
Yeah, especially for queer people, because you add to being Latinx, and you know, my dad can fix pretty much any car. And I feel like the Mexican mechanic is such a stereotype, but like he is that. And I could not fix a car to save my life. You know, there's that sort of whole machismo nonsense that's involved. And when you're a queer person or an effeminate person, you're trying to figure out your queerness and how you relate to it. And oftentimes, or sometimes for me, it was in contention with me trying to figure out how I relate to my Latinx identity. And so you add to an already existing tug of war the queerness, and you're like at an intersection that you're like, okay, but where do I go? And then I got to a point where I was like, ¿sabes qué? I'm standing right here. Like, this is it. Where I am is where I'm meant to be.
Yeah. And so like, what are you working on now? Like, what can we look forward to seeing from you?
Hopefully a lot. I am an ambitious person, and as evidenced by me joining every club. Like, what business did I have in the National Honor Society? I didn't have any business in it, but there I was. I am looking and actively working to get X, which is the pilot that One Script Pipeline made. I think it's a beautiful script, and that's great for me. But if I can find a way to get this actually on the screen, that's what matters, is so that people, my friends, can see themselves truly on TV. So hopefully X in 2021, 2022. That's the goal. And then of course more writing. It's always homework to be done. I feel like the life of a writer.
So I'm always curious of who might guess who they're a fan of. So these could be heroes of yours, peers, friends, people you creep on Instagram who don't know who you are, but you're in love with them. Like, who are some of those writers for you?
I definitely, Shonda Rhimes, I think, was the one that kind of sparked the idea. There's also a French writer who's not a Latinx writer, but he is a queer writer. And he really kind of, like, I feel like gave me permission when I was beginning out, because he's a writer, a filmmaker named Xavier Dolan. and his stuff was so beautiful and so queer. And I thought, wow, this is important to my artistic expression. And since then, like, definitely Stephen Canals and Tanya Saracho, I feel, are such like beacons of hope for me. I was at I think it was like a DGA, maybe Glisten event. I forget, but Stephen Canals was there speaking, and he talked about the journey in getting Pose made, and he talked about the fact that he got 150 no's before he got a yes, and obviously a very big yes, but that's been really helpful to me to know that someone who made something unapologetically queer, unapologetically Black and Latinx, that it's possible if you persist. And I think like that's a message that not a lot of people are talking about. I think on Twitter, right, or there can be this this strange sort of responsibility to seem like you have it together, like you are just out here thriving and you are working on your work in progress and you're taking generals and you're pitching. And I'm like, no, I had a really shitty meeting 3 weeks ago, and I'm not always in the mood to write. And it's like, it's not easy, and not every meeting is a yes. So to know that someone who has done it and is doing it in such an inclusive way got 150 no's, I'm like, okay, well, I'm at like 10 no's, so I got a long way to go. And Tanya, I had like the pleasure of meeting her in a general, and she was, there's some people who fake the funk on Twitter or in LA or the industry at large. And, they're allegedly all about being inclusive or helpful. But I met her, and she was very much herself in all the best ways, and so kind and so generous and so supportive, and has like made a career of opening doors and tearing down walls. And I just am in awe of that. And she worked on Looking, and she's just like, and How to Get Away with Murder. I mean, she's just like out here doing it and trying to help other people do it. And that's such a part of, like, it took me 9 years. It was really hard because I didn't know anybody. And I don't feel like it should be that difficult. Like, if you are willing to work hard and do it, it shouldn't require massive debt and heartache just to get an opportunity. So hopefully I can emulate that moving forward.
And so where can people follow you on social media?
You can follow me on Instagram at Estevan, Estevan. I'm there. If you want to come say hello, come hang out for nonsense. And you can also, if you want, if you want to have your potentially good image of me ruined, you can follow the podcast at Your Gay Cousins on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever.
I highly recommend the podcast. It's so dub, but I love it.
He doesn't recommend my Instagram, but he does recommend the podcast.
I love foolishness, so
there's a lot there.
So I like to have my guests help me title the podcast episode. So the prompt is a blank Latinx writer, and in that blank you can put as many words as you want. You can mix them all around, just whatever feels true to you, your writing, this conversation. I also use it as a community building tool, so that when someone sees the title, they can be like, oh, that's like me. I should listen to this episode. So what do you got?
Listen, I thought about this question probably more than anything else in leading up to this chat. It feels like such a big thing, but I think I was in the bath last night and this came to mind, and I felt like it was probably the most true. So I would say a flawed but determined queer Latinx TV writer with big dreams. That's because I feel like there is that you don't have to have it all together, and it can take you a long time, and it's not too late. And I never ever want to seem or pretend to be the person who is like got it all together, because I really don't. And if you feel like you are struggling but you still have big dreams, let's be friends.
And so with that, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Ruben. Also, thank you for doing this. You know what this is giving me? This is giving me very Inside the Actor Studio with James Lipton. Like, this is that space, and you're like really spotlighting so many different voices and artists. And thanks for having me a part of it.